I'm recording. Oops, I meant to pin my video. All right, we have this week, week 8. So this is the halfway point of the course. If we had a midterm, it would be this week, but this course doesn't have a midterm. The spring course has a midterm because that course is a completely different class. Somebody's ringing the doorbell. Yes. Okay. I'll talk about that when we get closer to it. Some people, depending on your degree plan, some people will not need the second semester companion to this course. It's a whole separate course. This is forms of literature. So we're going through poetry, short fiction, we'll do some drama. Second semester is British literature. So that is a history-based course. We start with the earliest writings from British literature and move through till we come up to contemporary literature. So that one is really heavy with terms and information and time periods and stuff like that. Some people do not need that course. You could tell by looking at your degree plan. It's 2321, that number. If you do not need the course for your degree plan, they will not let you stay in the class because STC doesn't want you to take a class that you don't need. So they will move you if you don't need the class to a regular English 4 class for second semester. So you might, I don't know if that's an issue for you, then you might want to just look into whether or not you need the course. But anyway, that's a side point. This week is week 8. We're in the poetry, and this week we're going to be continuing our analysis of poetry and developing our poetry analysis skills. And I have some updates for you, as usual. So just a reminder that this is an A week. We had 3 A weeks in a row to balance out the ratio of A's and B's. And next week is a B week. So next week we'll have B day on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. But this week is just A, so your formatives are just Tuesday and Thursday. Analysis papers were turned in on Saturday. So if you turned it in, then I'll be looking at it, obviously. Usually with long paper, not long papers, but like, you know, multiple page papers, I usually get them all done in a week and a half or so. But I'll return them to you as I complete them. So I usually do 10 to 15 a day, and I find that's where my grading is most consistent. So if I try to push myself to do, you know, like 30 in a day, then usually I just get grumpy and the grades go down. So I think it's in everybody's best interest. I try to keep it at 10 to 15 a day, and then in about a week and a half, I can be done with all those papers. But it does take a little longer to grade those than other assignments, as you can imagine. Plus, I'll give you feedback. So usually I like to look at those papers, and especially since it's the first paper, we do have a longer paper later in the semester, research paper. But I do like to give feedback. So whatever the grade is, I like to sort of explain why it's that grade. So if it's, you know, a 97, I'll usually make a note about what was great about the paper, and, you know, whatever it was that kept it from being 100. If it's a lower grade, you know, sometimes it's a 75, then I'll put reasons why it could have been better and from the rubric. So I do like to give feedback in that way. And it just takes a while to read through them and do that feedback. But those should be coming back to you starting this week, and you can read the feedback. Any comments? How was it with the analysis papers? Any issues or problems that you came across? Anybody want to put something in the chat or unmute and tell me? I think with papers, the issue is time management, making sure that you have enough time to draft and you know, get it looked over if you want, or, you know, take the time to craft it. You can do a rush job, but usually rush jobs don't get the best grades. So I think with papers in general, the more time you leave yourself to work on them, the better. But most all of them came in. I think there were only 2 people who had issues, and so most everybody turned in their paper on time. So I feel like the timeline was okay. Okay, reminder seniors that you should be working on your Apply Texas and your FAFSA. The counselors are going to be working with you next week on FAFSA. They're going to do it just like we did with the Apply Texas. So there's a day next week. I have to look on the schedule and let you know what day that is. I'll let you know next Tuesday, or I'll post it in Google Classroom message or something. But they're going to have another session in our Zoom where you have breakout sessions with your counselor and stuff like that. So just in case you have questions about FAFSA, they'll walk you through it and they're going to meet with you. Also, I think that there is a financial aid night. Did you guys get any information on that? I think it's on the 20th, which would be next Tuesday. I think they're doing a virtual financial aid night. I'll get more information on that for you too, because I know that they tentatively scheduled it, but I don't know if they've finalized that yet. Anyway, so there is help for your FAFSA if you're working on that, seniors. And just a note that you should finish your Apply Texas before you finish the FAFSA, so that you can submit. And when you submit, it goes to your colleges and they already have an account for you. If you're working on your essay, I have been looking at those. So people who wanted me to look at their college admissions essays have been sending them to me, and I give feedback on those. So if you want some help with that, if you know you're gonna want to do your best on it, then if you want, you can send it to me and I will give you my thoughts. What else? Also, seniors, you should have received an email about senior picks that are going to be taken next week. I think that date's wrong. I think it's the 22nd and the 23rd. I need to fix that. I had looked at it on the calendar and I think that's wrong. I think it's the 22nd and the 23rd on their flyer. They sent something out on email with your specific appointment time. They're doing it in the choir hall. And so I think that they set it up so that everybody has a specific time to come and do their pictures if you want to. These are, I'm assuming, for the yearbook. So, you know, it's like a dressy thing, and then they'll take a picture probably with a drape, with a bow tie and all that for the guys, and the drape. So that will be on that day. If you didn't receive an email about your assigned time for that, then you need to contact Mrs. Garcia, who is in charge of the yearbook. If you don't have her email, I will email me and I'll send it to you. In any case, those were sent out last week, those little invitations with explanations for when your dates and times are. Any questions on the updates? Anything you want more info on? We're still sort of in limbo about hybrid. According to the last update, when they extended our virtual situation, teachers are supposed to go back next Thursday and Friday and be on campus and make sure that we're going back to work and setting up. And then we're supposed to start virtually from our classrooms the following Monday, which would be 25th? 26th. But apparently there's another waiver that the district may or may not submit, so I don't really know. If it's hybrid, then they're going to start moving in students that want to come to class. Right now, it's just about work periods, no class is actually happening at school. So anyway, I don't know what to say about that, because every time I say, hey, next week this is happening, they change it. So stay tuned, I guess. If I know something, I'll send it out to you. I usually retweet stuff from the district, and then if I feel like it's going to impact you in some way, I'll usually put a message on Classroom. All right, let's go through stuff for this week. Continuing on with poetry, the formative should be up for today. So there is a formative for today. I'm giving feedback on those, so do make sure that you check your feedback. Most people are doing really well on their formatives. The formatives are designed for me to check and make sure you're understanding The material, I haven't really been giving quizzes. Normally by now I probably would have given 3 or 4 quizzes to check on your reading, but I feel like I'm doing that through the formative, so I don't want to add to it. That's one of the ways I'm trying to like sort of streamline on that. So do get to those formatives. I want to go over the reading that we did, not for this week because I went light on the reading last week because of the paper, but last week's class period was packed and it took me the whole time. And I didn't get a chance to talk about the first 2 reading selections from the textbook on a background on poetry. So I want to go over those today. There are 2 more for this week, recognizing kinds of poetry, it's down here, and figures of speech. Poetry is a long section in the book, and I don't really assign everything, all the background material and info. I just pick the ones that I think are most crucial that will help you with the projects and the assignments that we're doing. They go into some details that we don't really need to do at this point, like metrical patterns and stuff like that. It's important in some other ways, but this is an overview, so we don't need to do that. But I do want to talk about these 2. So I'm going to open up the PDFs for those. You should have already read these, so I just kind of want to go over it. Generally, I like to go over the reading assignments from the textbook just in case there are any questions and just to hear, so that you can hear it explained a different way, going through the terminology and so and so. This part that I had you read on defining poetry kind of takes a little bit of a historical background, saying that poetry has been alive for, millennia, and the way that we can define poetry. And then they sort of launch into some terminology here that should be fairly familiar to you. If you've been coming up through advanced courses, then the terminology that they use in that section shouldn't be new, but it's a good refresher to start remembering the terminology. Not a lot of poetry happens in English 3 because it's a rhetoric class if you're taking 1301, 1302. So not a lot of poetry happens, if any at all. So I'd just like to have you read these just to refresh your memory. Probably you did some poetry maybe in pre-AP back at the beginning of your high school career, but do make sure that you refresh your memory on these terms because we're going to be using them frequently as we talk about poetry. Form, as the way that poetry is set up on the page. We talk about lines and stanzas as building blocks of poetry. Sound is crucial. We talked about that the other day when we were talking about the beauty of the language when I was demonstrating some different poems last week. And with that, we usually consider alliteration and assonance and consonants. It's important to know the difference between those 3. I know you've probably heard those terms before, but make sure that you have notes on the difference between them. The way that I remember it is, well, it's kind of gross the way I remember it. Alliteration, I think most people get that. That's the repetition of the beginning consonant sounds in words, and it creates a pattern. And when we read poetry out loud, then we can hear that pattern and it makes it melodious. It makes it more musical than if we were reading a paragraph from a novel. So alliteration will be, repetition of sounds. Sometimes those sounds at the beginning of the words, like if you have a d, d, d in a row, can create a sound that mimics something that's being discussed in the poem. A bird sound or a repetitious heartbeat or something like that. So sometimes poets will try to use alliteration to do that. Assonance is the sister to alliteration because assonance is when we have the repetition of vowel sounds. It does not have to be at the beginning of a word. The only one where it really has to be at the beginning of a word is alliteration. So alliteration is always at the beginning. You can remember that because it's, got the A, well, so there's assonance. I was gonna say it's got the A at the beginning of the word and that's the beginning of the alphabet, but assonance is when you have repeated vowel sounds anywhere in the words, and that creates a sort of rhyming sound, sort of subtle rhyming sound. And then consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds within words. So consonants and alliteration are similar. The only difference is that alliteration is when we're talking about the beginning of words, those first syllables in the words. I know I said that the way I remember it is gross, so, and I don't want to leave you hanging because I'm sure you're sitting there wondering what is gross about it. So the way that I remember it is with assonance. If I can kind of like specify that which one, then I can remember the other one. So I usually remember assonance because it starts with ass. And it's sort of juvenile. It starts with ass, and I remember that assonance goes with vowel sounds because your ass is associated with your bowels. So I remember ass, vowel, vowel, vowel. So I remember that. I don't know if that'll work for you, but sometimes those silly connections that we make with things help us remember. Rhyme, of course, is an important feature of poetry. Make note that when we're talking about rhyme, we're not just talking about the ends of the lines. Sometimes poets are more subtle, and we do see rhyme, internal rhyme, and we want to make note of that too. Imagery, I'm sure you've worked with that before. Imagery is meant to appeal to the senses, to create vivid description. And then figurative language is when we're not speaking literally. Imagery is a literal device. So something's being described literally, usually in a vivid way. And then figurative language is when we're saying something is something else. We're using it not literally. So then they talk about different types of poetry like haiku and stuff like that. But that's kind of a short section there. Any questions on that section from last time? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Not really, you can always ask me questions. My cuckoo clock is behind today. All right, the other section that you should have read for last week, I'm going through these because we had a full plate last time, was this section called reading poetry. And I think that this is kind of like the page that I would put a Post-it on and flag it in my book, because as we're talking about poetry, this one has a really good overview of a lot of, like on one page or a little more, page and a half, a lot of the terms that you should be using as we are writing about and discussing poetry. So if you flag this page or, you know, bend the corner down, whatever, this will really help you start to use that terminology as you're discussing the poems that we're studying. So it's got a list of things like, you know, voice, and it's got questions. So what do they mean by voice, diction, imagery, figures of speech, some of those sorts of elements. And then it goes into ways to actively read a poem so that you're not passively reading it. We've already talked about how poetry has the quality of being compacted and condensed. And so part of our job when we're trying to figure out a poem is to expand it. And in the video that you watched for today, you should have watched me go through a poem completely and unpack it in the way that helps us to see all of those different elements. And all these things are pretty much touched on in that video. So this is a good reference page for when we're talking about poems and using these terms so that you can use them appropriately. Theme is something that comes up at the end, and sometimes when I'm asking you to do an assignment or look at some poems over the week, I will ask you to look for the poetic idea. If you watched that video and took notes on the 1, 2, 3 method, which you were supposed to do for today, then theme is the same thing as poetic idea. And eventually when you're done with the poem, you have to get to that place, right? Like, so what is this poem trying to teach me about life? What am I supposed to learn here? And so we want to get to that before we consider our analysis done with a poem. So then they walk you through in the text some things, some strategies that you can use. Lots of times I have students tell me, oh, it makes more sense when I see you go over it, but then when I try to do it on my own, it confuses me. And that's normal. I mean, we learned that from the summer reading, that the people who have been looking at this stuff for a really long time, it comes more naturally to them, and they can see the elements and explain them in ways that are more clear and seem obvious once they point them out. So like sometimes people think there's some magical thing that English teachers have to be able to find these elements in a poem, but really it's just experience. So if you're a student, it means you're learning and you're starting out. So it's okay to feel like that sometimes, especially with older poems or more challenging poems. The thing is to do your best, go through the 1, 2, 3 process the best that you can. And then when you come to class, if there are questions on the poems, we can discuss them, right? The job in class is to make sure that we pick up anything that was confusing or problematic. So it's okay to have questions about the things that you read when you come to class. It's not okay to say, I didn't understand the first stanza, so I stopped reading it, or I didn't even try to do the 1, 2, 3. You have to give it a shot. And over time, it will become easier for you. So then they walk you through some active reading strategies to preview the poem, how to annotate. I know that's a little challenging for you since you have your textbook. If we were in class, I'd probably be giving you handouts so that you could write all over them. But they haven't figured out how to do that, make a piece of paper come out of your computer. There's an invention. Somebody work on that for science fair. But they walk you through ways that you can annotate. Of course, I taught you the 1, 2, 3 analysis, and that's basically what I want you to do with the poems to get a complete analysis. They take you through digging, which is a poem that I shared with you last Tuesday, and how that one could be annotated. So that should have seemed familiar to you. And then after that, there's a part about writing about poetry and planning an essay. We are not going to be writing an essay about poetry this term. There is a project for the poetry unit, but it's a video, it's not a paper. There's only one more paper, and that's going to come when we start looking at drama. So I think these 2 chapters together, these 2 little sections, are more of like an intro to analysis and looking at poetry in an analytical way. And I made them, kind of short because we were still working on the paper when I assigned those. But if there's anything from those readings that you want me to talk about in more depth, just put it in the chat or unmute and let me know. Okay, somebody asked me, I think somebody sent me an email last week, these terms that we're taking notes on, all the ones from short fiction, all the ones from poetry, there'll be a lot of them from drama because we're going to read an ancient Greek drama. Are they going to be on the exam? Yeah, they're all on the semester exam. So the notes that you're doing, you should be reviewing them, and the reading assignments that we do in class are meant to reinforce them. So as you're looking at poems, use that poetry terminology. Start making it part of your way of thinking about poetry. And then when we get to the semester exam, it will be easier for you to review and work with those terms. The semester exam is an application exam. So usually there's a part that's sort of multiple choice, but the majority of the exam is, here's a brand new poem that you've never seen before, write an essay that does this, or answer these questions. Or here is a short piece of fiction that you've never seen before, that we didn't study in class. Apply what you learned about short fiction to this short piece, that kind of thing. So there'll be parts where you have to identify terminology, but then the rest of the exam is, okay, now show that you have the analytical skills on these different forms of literature, because the course is called Forms of Literature. That's how it works. Just a little preview since we're halfway through the term, but that's how the semester exam goes. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis with you. Oh, you know what? I don't know if I charged up my. I have a setup over here for. Oh, I should have done this ahead of time. For notes and stuff. So let me get that set up here. You should have watched the video. It's about a half an hour video. I don't know. I usually speed up videos when I have to watch them, but then the person usually sounds like Minnie Mouse. But you should have watched the video where I went through the 1, 2, 3 analysis completely. And so that one, I want to talk about it here. So if you have your notes and stuff, it'd be good to get that out. The 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis is just a way for you to work through a poem, and I find it the easiest way to work through a poem in, okay, good. Just setting up my document camera over here. Okay, I'm gonna use this guy. All right, that's upside down. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't get this set up beforehand. I should have, but okay. In any case, I want to talk about 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis because we're going to be using it on a lot of the poems that we do. And specifically, we're going to be using it on 3 poems this week. You should have done a 1, 2, 3 analysis on one of the poems that you read for this week. They're all 3, there were 4 of them. And I asked you to choose one of them. They were all about poetry. I don't know why it's not focusing. Usually it does. All right, well, we can get through it anyway. So I want to talk about 1, 2, 3. There's a whole video about this, and I'm assuming that you already have notes on that. I don't know why it's bugging me. Let me see. Get it to do. There we go. Sorry, I know that that's annoying when something's not in focus. Okay, so the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis is the way that I want you to look at poems. And I know that it sounds simplistic when I put 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis, but it's because I want you to read the poem 3 times for 3 different purposes, right? And I'm not going to go through a whole poem right now because I did that in the video, but I do want to go through and talk about the steps because maybe when you did the first one, it was kind of new to you, and the poem that you chose, you should have worked through one. We're gonna do a little homework check in a minute, make sure that you did that. But this will just sort of reinforce what you need to be doing with the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. This week, there are 3 poems for you to look at, and I want you to do a 1, 2, 3 analysis on all 3 of them. So when you come to class next Tuesday, you should have a 1, 2, 3 analysis on all 3 of the poems. So I think it's a good opportunity for me to just kind of go through and repeat what was in the video about the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. So I'm going to talk about that, and maybe add to your notes if you already took notes from that video. And if you didn't take notes from that video, then I don't know, maybe you stopped it and worked on the poem for each section. But for each one, we have 3 different reading tasks. Because poetry has that compacted quality, reading it multiple times will help us get something from the poem each time. And so the first time that we read it, obviously, we're just looking for the basics, right? We're looking through the poem. We're looking for things like speaker. Do I have a first person speaker? Do I have a third person speaker? What can I tell about the speaker, etc. Also, I might have to have some vocab or like concepts or allusions. So if there are any that are unfamiliar to me, then I have to stop and I have to look those up. Poetry is so concentrated that if something's mentioned, I can't just skip over it. I can't just skip over a word that I don't know because every word is useful in a poem. So when I'm doing this first reading, I want to go through and look up anything that is unfamiliar to me. I want to look up if there's a reference to something biblical or something in mythology or something historical, I want to look that up and at least get a working knowledge of what that is so I can figure out why it's being mentioned in the poem. I also want to look and see, just in general, are there any shifts? Shifts are crucial in poetry. And in the first reading, I can kind of get a feel for how the poem is moving through ideas. Is there a big but? I like to say, is there a big but? We're talking a lot about buts today, or I am. I don't know. It's Butt Tuesday, I guess. Is there a but in the poem, or so, or any of those connective conjunctions, coordinating conjunctions? Yet, probably you learned fanboys, right? The grammatical term is coordinating conjunctions. So if there's a big but right on line 12, then you know that there's a shift. All of this stuff, but okay, something shifting. So I want to just notice that in that first reading. Then I'm going to read through the poem again, and this time I look for the figurative elements. So this part is kind of literal, right? The first time I read the poem, I'm looking at it in a literal sense. Anything that's figurative, I'm going to leave for the second reading, because I'm going to have to unpack that metaphor. I'm going to have to look at that imagery. I'm going to have to try to figure out what's being compared with this personification. So with that second reading, I'm looking on the figurative level. This is where I'm looking at metaphor, looking at symbol, those things that aren't meant literally. I'm exploring how those things are being used. Now, I'm not just pointing them out. So imagery, even though imagery is mostly literal, I want to make sure that I'm looking at the effects. This is the biggest difference that I see in top performing students with poetry and sort of like mid-range performing students with poetry. So the people who make the A's on the poetry stuff are usually the people who realize that it's not just about saying, oh, there's a simile on line 2. Oh, there's a metaphor down here in stanza 3. The people who make the highest points are the people who say what the metaphor's doing, why it's being used, what this imagery is creating, and no, not just an image in the reader's mind. So why does the author put that symbol in there? So the effects are what's going to elevate your analysis. So you can keep that in mind. We are going to have a poetry project to do. We're going to make a video. But this is sort of like the goal. I mean, I think you've probably been pointing out metaphors and similes in pieces of literature since middle school. But thinking about what it's doing in the poem is the crucial part. So the second level of reading is a lot more in depth because you're spending time unpacking all of those figurative elements. The third time is, okay, now we need to read for meaning. All right, so what? There's a metaphor and it has this effect. So what? The speaker is a first person speaker. So what? They're alluding to the Trojan War. All that stuff has to end up somewhere. And where it ends up is meaning. And so for us, that means theme. Remember that a theme is a life lesson. Love is not a theme, it is a subject or a topic. So I would have to say, what do we learn about love in this poem? What is it that the speaker's trying to teach us about love? So I have to get to that. If I get, and I mentioned this in the video, if I get to the third reading of the poem and I can't come up with the life lesson, then I need to go back and do more work here. So you're not really done with the poem until you can come up with whatever it is we're supposed to learn about the poem. There is a trick, and I think I talked about it in the video too. It's been a while since, it's been a few months since I made that video, but the trick is to think of the topics of a poem or the subjects. So yeah, this poem is about love, or this poem is about death, or this poem is about hatred, whatever, right? And then ask myself, like just generally, and then ask myself, so what do we learn? What is this supposed to be teaching us about that topic? And then that will get us to the theme. What do we learn about the subject? And that will get us to the theme, right? Now, sometimes the themes are really subtle and sometimes they're super obvious. So that's basically the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. And that's what I want you to do on 3 poems this week. I chose 3 poems that are all linked together because they all are about the night. And I want you to use this 1, 2, 3 analysis. I want you to actually write out the analysis. You can either print out the poems. I don't put PDFs. They're in your book. Or you can put Post-its in your book, right? Maybe I can try to find some PDFs, but I think most people don't print stuff out. I don't even think everybody has a printer these days. But you can make notes in your notebook so that you have notes on these elements. But next Tuesday, I'm going to ask you to submit your 1, 2, 3 analysis, a picture of your 1, 2, 3 analysis from one of those poems. So do all 3 of them. And then when you come to class, I'm going to have you turn in one of them, just so that I can see how you're doing with the 1, 2, 3 analysis, if that makes sense. So do you have those written out? Lots of times people be like, well, I thought about those things, but you can't turn in, your thought from your brain. You can't just, like mentally send it to me. So do make sure that you do those. And it's down here in the assignment. These are the 3 poems down here. All right, any questions about 1, 2, 3 analysis? Is there anything else that you want me to spend a little time talking about with that? I know that it's new. I know it's new because I made it up. Okay. If you're working on the poems over the week or like come Saturday and you are stuck and you just feel like you can't get through much of a 1, 2, 3 analysis with one of the poems or all the poems, please reach out to me. Send me an email. I'm getting people in some of my classes, not a lot of people, 1 or 2, who are like, oh, I'm dropping the class, like in my AP class, and it's like, you haven't even asked me a single question about what we're working on, so please just reach out and say, I'm reading Acquainted with the Night, and I think I understand it's about this, but stanza 2 is really bugging me. Can you help me? I'll sit down and I'll give you a little push start and give you some things to think about that will help you with your analysis. So I'm here for those things if you reach out and do that. So I know that 1, 2, 3 analysis is new and we're just starting with it. So if you need a little help with it, then just let me know. It's normal. All right, last thing for today is I want to check your homework. So you should have looked at one of these 4 poems. I chose 4 poems, and because of the paper, I only wanted you to look at one of the poems. So I let you pick whichever one of the 4 that you wanted to look at. And I set up, oh, this is to be, hold on. I set up a Padlet. So click where it says Padlet over here, right here, where it says in-class activity. And I want you to go to your 1, 2, 3 analysis that you did on one of those poems. I'm gonna give you a few minutes. And I want you to put, this one's set up differently than our previous Padlet where you were putting in your infographics. So depending on which poem you looked at, I want you to go ahead and look at your notes and put in your poetic idea. Now this is not gonna show up for everybody to see. This is just gonna show up for me to see, but you should be able to click on the plus underneath the poem that you chose. And I want you to go ahead and type in the poetic idea or the theme that you came up with for whichever poem that you chose. So I want you to take a minute and do that so that I can see how you're doing with that 1, 2, 3 analysis. I'm gonna give you a couple minutes to do that. Should already have it written out, so just type it in there.
Miss, I tried going into the Padlet and it says that it's private.
Okay, let me fix it. I think it's under share. Ah, yeah. Here we go. Okay, try it now. I think I fixed it.
It works now.
Okay, good. Take a few minutes and work on that. Make sure that you put your name on your entry. I'm going to take this for a grade. I feel like people who do their homework and are prepared for class should, um, that should be noticed. And I feel like the people that are prepared will get grades accordingly, and the people who can't present their assignment should get those according grades. So everybody who's here with me in class that can supply the poetic idea pretty quickly here obviously did their assignment. Anybody who has to add this later because they either were not with us in class or didn't do the homework will have to get, you know, a lower grade. So go back and put your name in there if you don't have it. All right, so if you weren't able to put in your poetic idea, you should go back and do that later on today. Obviously, the top grades are going to be for the people who had that ready as the assignment asked. And just a reminder that you should do all of the things that I ask you to do to prepare for class. So you can go in and put it in later. That's fine. If you're watching this video later because you weren't here in class, but there is an advantage to being here in class, and there's an advantage to having your assignments done. And everything that I ask you to do is important. I'm not going to waste your time with things that aren't crucial, especially now. I'm trying to decide on those things and limit what I ask you to do because of our situation. So I'll leave that open. You can go ahead and add yours if you need to later today. I will probably close it, you know, today or tomorrow, so that I can see who's paying attention to their stuff for class. And also I want to see how you're doing with the 1, 2, 3 analysis and how you're doing with poetic idea and theme. So I'll have a look at those over the next couple of days. So I want to spend the last part of class just going over your assignments for this week. So if I go back to Blackboard here, just a reminder that you do have a formative on Thursday. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. I think it's a question about the poems for this week. Okay, so this week I want for you to practice that 1, 2, 3 analysis. So I chose 3 poems that are about night. So they are in kind of a little topic group. They all have the same concept of night, but each poem has a different way of looking at night. So they're short. They're all in the textbook too. So make sure that you do a written analysis for each of those 3. And also take notes on 2 more sections of the textbook. They're fairly short section. Well, the first one's fairly short. Figures of speech is longer, but the material should be familiar to you. They're going to go through metaphor and then show you examples of metaphor in poetry and explain how you would think about metaphor in poetry and what you would say, what's the effect of it, and so on. So it's more of a tutorial kind of section where they'll talk about something and then they'll show you a poem that is an example. But do take notes on any terminology that's in those sections so that you are prepared for class next week. Also, the last bullet down here is just a little heads up kind of thing. We are not going to be writing a paper for poetry. I already mentioned that today. Instead, for poetry, you will be choosing a poem and doing a video explication of that poem. An explication is like I do in that video for Snow, for that Emily Dickinson poem to demonstrate 1, 2, 3. So you'll do an explication, which is sort of walking through the poem and explaining what the poet's doing and the effects. and you will choose a poem or two that you want to make a video of doing that sort of an explanation. I'm going to be officially assigning it next week, but I want you to be thinking about it. So I put the assignment down here for you to kind of preview and kind of just be thinking about it. The idea is that I want you to choose a poem or poems that demonstrate a social issue, either a historical social issue. You could go back and look at poetry from, history, and use a poem where somebody was concerned about, the Napoleonic Wars or something that was happening in the society at the time. Or you can use a more contemporary piece that looks at issues in today's world or from 50 years ago or, World War II, whatever time period you want. But the focus is on societal issues. So the poem that you choose will ask you to examine that poem for what it was worried about at the time in society. So I'll talk more about that assignment next time, but I like sometimes to give you a little heads up on things that are coming up so that they can just be in the back of your mind. But I don't want to make the assignment until we have a little more practice with the poems for this week and a little more time to discuss them and work on them before we go into the project. So just a little heads up. I don't think that it's due until November. No, there's two parts to it. There's a part where you have to make your video and submit it. I think that's due on the 31st. I don't know, I'm guessing because I can just click on it here. I'm just telling you for the future. Yeah, so the 31st, it's due sometime before Halloween. And then, is Halloween even a thing this year? I don't know. I think some people aren't doing Halloween because like COVID. Anyway, I think Hidalgo County said no trick-or-treating, right? Is that accurate?
Yeah, no.
And then, yeah, no trick-or-treating, right? People still will. I feel like people in the neighborhood still will, but anyway, so, and then you're supposed to critique your classmates' videos by the following Wednesday. So everybody will post, and I'll explain how you're going to post them and all that stuff next time. But you'll post your video. No, you do not have to come out with your face and everything in your video, but you at least need to walk us through with your voice about the poem. So if you're worried about that, don't worry. You can come out or not, but you need to be doing the explication yourself. And then you'll look at the videos of two classmates and work with their material a little bit. So there's like two different assignments, but that's just a little preview. So you can look that over before next time, and I will officially assign it next time. That way you have like a little heads up on that. So any questions on the assignments for this week? Hopefully that's manageable. It's hard to know. I'm sitting here in my dining room all the time by myself, and I don't know what other people are making you do. So I feel like it's doable, and I feel like it's, not overboard or anything, but maybe it is. I don't know. I hear people complaining about other classes, and I'm like, oh, probably they complain about my class when I'm not around, but okay. I think it's going okay. But if you have concerns about the amount of work in the class, please just communicate with me. I'm pretty open. I'm not going to hold it against you or make you feel bad about it. I just don't have any way of gauging it. And I know that as new students of mine, you maybe don't feel comfortable doing that, but I don't know, get one of the kids from last year to tell me. They will. All right, if there aren't any more questions or anything else that you want me to go over today, then that's it for today. I appreciate you taking the time to come to class, and I'm looking forward to reading your poetic ideas. So that's it. Have a good week.